I am so excited to be here. Content testing and research is a topic that I am super, super passionate about. I'm the founder and CEO of UX Writers Collective, and we have actually created an entire course on content research and testing. So that's how much I love this topic. And I hope that you guys will learn something from this presentation and take away good stuff. Okay, I am the former head of UX content strategy at Google. I worked in Google Payments and for Google Assistant developing assistant transactions. And I have had past roles at Intuit as a UX lead and startups like Sumo Logic and Gift and lots of others. Okay, and it's really slow to advance. Woohoo, Intuit. I don't know why it's really taking a long time to get my screen to advance. There we go. Okay, what we'll cover today. So we want to talk about why content testing is super important to product success. So we know a lot that user testing in general is a great idea. And we all know too that people talk about it a lot more than oh gosh, okay, so now people are saying I can only see the, shoot, this is just terrible. Okay, guys, so you can't see my screen, which is really a bummer. Zoom, be my friend. We can see the first slide only. Okay, shoot. Let me see if I can get this to, so I just stopped sharing. We'll try sharing again and see how we do. Okay, let's try this. Now I lost the chat, but maybe you guys can. Holy moly, we need, now I lost the chat, darn it. Okay, there it is. Chat, be my friend. All working, woohoo, okay. I'm so sorry, guys. This happens. You know, I was so happy to not be on a stage. Like, it's so much more comfortable to be at home in front of your computer with just no audience. But the downside is you don't know what everybody else can see. So, okay, looks like we're good to go now. Yay. Okay. So we'll talk about why content testing is important. Covered that. We'll talk about a couple ways to test content. And one of the ways we'll talk about is testing it combined with the design. So integrated into the layouts and the mock-ups and the prototypes. And then we'll talk about a couple of methods for testing content in a standalone environment. So that should give us a couple different ways to test our content. And then the last thing we'll touch on is how to share out recommendations so that your team actually updates the copy like you've recommended. Okay. So we kind of know this. If we're UX writers, and I know a lot of you guys are, content is sort of got this like little sort of back seat in the room sometimes. And we really want to get front and center. So content issues are often lost. They're not really understood well by designers who are not focusing so much on the words. They're focusing more on the interactions, the flows, the layouts, the architecture. So it's our job to get in there and understand the content issues and get those fixed in the way we know how. And a lot of times content issues are underrated for how important they are to the experience. So everybody's awareness is raising on that, which is fantastic. The more we talk about content testing, hopefully the better that'll get. So testing content is like making pasta. This is one of those silly slides, but I gotta say it. Without sauce, it's just noodles. So if you're testing a design and you're not paying attention to all of that content, it's like you're just testing noodles, and the sauce, all the flavor, all of that nuance that's in the sauce is lost. And so we don't want to lose that. We want to pay attention to it. You know, add more salt, be salty at all opportunities. Okay, so why is it important to test real content as part of any real design? We've all kind of seen the lorem ipsum thing, and we know that, like, okay, lorem ipsum is bad. Let's talk a little bit about why lorem ipsum doesn't work. One thing I've seen a lot in testing designs is that the prototype content is bad. And what do I mean by bad? Instructions are unclear. Somebody has written like quick, really rough copy, and it usually isn't the UX writer. It's probably, you know, a designer. It might be a researcher. It might be a product manager. And you'll see users just get hung up on a usability test because they don't understand an instruction. So UX writers can help in every step of the testing process, even backing up to the planning phase where you're articulating the questions that you want to ask of users. Get your writer, if you're a designer or researcher, get your writer to look at those questions and make sure the questions are clear and that the scenarios are nice and succinct and well written before you even go into testing. So use your UX writer. When the design is iterated and it changes, the content has to evolve too. Otherwise, it, you know, obviously you're just making up new bad copy. So ideally, your writer is also evolving your content at the same time that your design is evolving. And that is a golden way to test, all the way from mockups to prototypes to final release and beta. Okay, so design should reflect content priorities and not placeholders. And that means that when we have a message that we want to share with users, there's a hierarchy of information, and we want to make sure that that's accurately reflected. So I'm going to show you an example here. So this lovely design on the left has lorem ipsum copy. And that's nice if you can find a headline for something that is only 2 words. Never happens, or very rarely. And then we've got a 2-line body text, and then we've got button text and a little micro copy below the button text. And when we put in the real copy, we can see that the layout of this screen does not work with the copy. So always make sure that your copy and your messaging takes priority over just having a nice layout. So you'll often have, you know, a design situation where they say, okay, I need the headline to be 12 characters. Well, you know, what can you say in 12 characters? Not a heck of a lot. So make sure you're working with your designers and you're pushing back. If you have a message that's longer than 12 characters and it doesn't fit in the layout, make sure that your design team is adjusting for the content and not just the content adjusting for the design. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so how do we do this testing thing? Let's talk about some methods by design phase. All right. So let's say we have this discovery phase. That's, you know, early research that you're doing on a product. You're maybe checking out your target audience. You're getting to know your customers. Your UX researchers might be developing personas. You might be looking into what are the critical tasks as you're developing a new product or a new feature. And some of those methods would be customer interviews, totally key, totally important. And in a customer interview, you're going to talk a lot about their user journey, for example. How are they doing things today? And how will your product replace what they're doing today in a much better way using language that they already understand? So we know customer language is important. The time to find out what that customer language sounds like is very, very early in the process. Stakeholder interviews, that doesn't just mean management. That also means your support reps. So those support reps are full of just absolute, a wealth of golden information that you can take away. What are customers struggling with? What language do they use to describe what they're struggling with? We all know these are important methods, but make sure that you do your due diligence and collect all this before you even start writing. Card sorting is important for information architecture, but it can also be used to map out task flows. A lot of this stuff I'm just going to cover very, very lightly. If you guys take our content testing course, I don't mean to pitch hard here, but we'll cover all this stuff in much more depth. I'll just touch on a couple of methods today so you guys at least have some info to take away. And Google Trends is awesome for figuring out preferred terms. So we'll cover these examples in a minute. When you get to the mock-up phase, highlighter testing, storyboarding is important for confirming, okay, user, this is how we see you doing this task. Does this look right to you? So storyboarding is really good for confirming like your logic behind your task and your flows. A 5-second test is usually used by marketing. We'll show an example of that in a minute. Design thinking, not even going to touch that today. Competitive research, make sure you look at your competitors. I have, in fact, come up with a tagline that was very, very similar to a competitor's before I did the research and was embarrassed to realize that we almost released with a tagline that was very close to what somebody else is already using. Don't do that. Okay, in prototypes, usability testing, absolutely the golden method. When you're prototyping, do that usability testing. We'll touch on that in a second. A/B testing, direct surveys, we'll touch on that. Closed testing is more complicated. We will not talk about that today, but that's where people do sort of like a fill in the blanks. Guess what words would belong in this instructional text? And then post-launch methods are listed here. I'm not gonna touch on those too much. Let's move on. Okay, so how to test your UI guidance and instructions. Usability testing is the golden standard. Obviously, we have the lovely, lovely COVID-19 requiring us to now be very good at remote and unmoderated testing. Lucky for us, there are lots of awesome, awesome companies out there offering remote unmoderated testing. User testing, user Zoom, there are so many. One of the ways that a UX writer can help, and I mentioned this before, is making sure that those scenarios and those task instructions are super clear. That's really important for remote unmoderated user testing. When you're watching user testing, what issues are coming up repeatedly? Are they snagging on an instruction? Are they pausing and hesitating because they're not getting all the info that they need? So is something missing? How do users talk about a feature? So if they're asking you a question, they might use different language than what's on the screen. Pay attention to that, make lots of notes, listen and learn. Okay. So let's watch a little example of a user test. This is what they look like. One thing here about user testing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that it is so important to get outside of the tech bubble. So if you work in Silicon Valley, make sure you are testing with people in Kentucky and Louisiana and Idaho or wherever your audience is. Don't go to the guy who sits next to you, because the techies that you work with are in the top 4% of tech savvy people in the world. So make sure when you're testing, you're going out and talking to real humans, average people who don't know techie language. All right, let's take a look at this. Whoops. How do we get that video to play? Go out of presenter mode for just a second here. So.
All right. Add to order. My coupon has been fulfilled. And I want to add another pizza, because if I have friends over, then we're probably going to need more than one pizza. So how can I do that? Add another to this coupon or continue shopping. What does this mean? What is the difference? Like, if I continue shopping, am I still able to use this deal for the $8.99? Or do I have to click this in order to use it again? Because what if I wanted to look at the other stuff?
Okay. So what did we see in that example video? We saw a woman who was testing a little coupon function for Domino's Pizza. And as writers, when we listen to that, whoops, there we go. When we watched that video, we heard her say, "Your coupon has been fulfilled." And she kind of understood what that meant, but you could tell very subtly that she thought that was weird language. And I'm not sure that designers or researchers would pick up on that the way that a writer would. So get in the room where the usability testing is happening, or watch those videos after the fact, because you're going to pick up different things than other people on your design team will. Testing is awesome for helping you understand what a user's mindset is. Do they have a mental model of what they're working with? Do they understand how it works? When you talk about mental model, you want to ask questions like, what just happened? What do you think will happen next? And that will reveal sort of the scope of where a user thinks they are in your flows and how they think things will work in your product. So always sort of ask contextual questions about before and after. Voice and tone and comprehension. If we're not testing these things, we're guessing. And that's okay. We guess a lot in design. It's part of our job, right? We're designers, we're creatives, we're comfortable with guessing, but it's so nice to have validation. And so that's half the reason to test, right? Here's a testing method for voice and tone. We're going to talk about highlighter testing here. And highlighter testing is a fantastic, simple way to test for emotional resonance, sentiment, which means like, what is somebody's emotional reaction to your words? And then you can test the weight of the response. So let's look at an example. So this is a little test that I ran on my college-age daughter. And what did I do? I printed out Facebook's login page, their sign-up page, on paper, and I handed her some pens. So this is very low tech. This is, easy to do. You just need a customer or 2 or 3 or 5. Okay, so how do you do this? You get a couple of pens, and I picked just 2 colors, yellow and pink. If my user thought that something was a little bit negative feeling, she was to mark that with yellow highlighter. And if she thought that it had a positive connotation, she would mark it with pink. Okay, so we see here she's marked the word Facebook with yellow, which if anyone's here from Facebook, I'm sorry. This was also a while ago. So she doesn't have a lot of trust for Facebook. So when she first step went through and marked pink and yellow, then I said, okay, user, now tell me more about those marks. Put some words to those. And so you can see here, there's a positive and a negative list of terms. And I said, okay, describe a little more of that feeling that was behind your highlighting. And so that was her next step, was to add these emotional connotations, sort of what did she feel? So down here, gender, female, male, or something different. And she was surprised and delighted by that. So cool. Now we know that if I'm working at Facebook, I'm like, yeah, if I was uncertain about that, I now know that it's a pretty cool thing for young people and probably people in general. The next step that's not shown here is that she would have assigned a weight to those emotions. So the next step would have been, put a value 1 to 5, for how much that impacted you. How reassured did you feel when you read "It's free and always will be"? So then she would assign a number between 1 and 5. If she felt super awesomely reassured, she'd give it a 5. And in that way, you can actually quantify sentiment testing, which is very valuable when you want to present your findings. So this is a quick view of highlighter testing and how to do it. All right, let's move on. When you want to test information hierarchy, you have a couple of choices. You can do a quick A/B test or multivariate testing. Multivariate is one of those complex words, and it just means more than two. So that's actually super simple. And you just say, you know, which do you like better, this one or that one, A or B? And so that's one way to test. There's also something called a 5-second test. 5-second test can be super valuable, especially when you're working on landing pages and marketing pages. So let's do a quick 5-second test. I have lost my chat here. I'm not sure where it went. Okay, so a quick 5-second test. I'm going to show you guys a screen. I'm going to wait about 5 seconds, and then you'll have some impression of it, and think about what that impression is. Okay, time's up. So if I were running this as a 5-second test, I would now hide the screen and I would ask you, what does this website do? What are the things you can get done here? What could you know, and if we're lucky, this is Alibaba. So if we're lucky, they would say, I can buy things. Okay, awesome. So we've made some progress, and it looks like if they aren't overwhelmed entirely by the screen, they could figure out that there is a lot of stuff that they could buy at Alibaba. So that would sort of be what you'd want the takeaway to be, that they could buy just about anything they want. So, but then there's this confusing here, online trade show, real-time meeting with exhibitors. And when I looked at the screen, this threw me off. I really didn't know what real-time meeting with exhibitors had to do with anything else on the page. So I found that confusing. And that's what I would have shared with the researcher. So when you are testing for information hierarchy, one of the things that your user is going to take away is the biggest headline or the biggest text and copy that stood out to them. So for me, that was real-time meeting with exhibitors. This is almost what I saw first. I don't know what it means. So this 5-second test was rough if I'm Alibaba. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, 5-second tests are fast. In this test, we can see from Zapier that this is way more easy to understand what they do. Look at this nice bam in your face headline. You just can't miss it. This is what Zapier does. I can just sign in right away. Easy automation for busy people. Just, you know, it's right there. You just pick it up really quickly. And then we've got these trust logos, which of course just have an instant impact on making me feel like, oh, okay, they're legitimate. So that's what a 5-second test looks like. Let's continue on. I also mentioned A/B testing for information hierarchy. And in this example, when we talk about content first design, this was a content first design that I submitted to the designer. And to me, the thing that was important was, we're on a mission to save you money. This is how the designer mocked up my content design. Now, I'm showing this example because clearly, even years later, I'm like, oh no, designer, you missed the mark. But you can see here that the designer has really changed what stands out to the user, and the information hierarchy has shifted hugely here. And these are the kinds of things that you want to test with users. So when we did this design, we didn't test this right away, but we could have. We could have shown these two next to each other, and we could have said, which do you like better? The other thing that I might have discovered as a content designer is that users like B a lot better, because they want to know how to get started. They don't really care that we're on a mission to save them money. So whenever you're testing, be ready to be surprised. Be ready to learn from users and hear things that you don't expect. So I was all attached to this content design and I thought it was awesome, but maybe this one would have been the one, you know, B would have been the one that won with users. So make sure that you're testing, because otherwise you just don't know. Okay. So those were some methods on how to test both the content and the design together. Now we'll talk about a couple of methods for testing just the content. I have to tell you guys, I can't see the chat anymore, and it is really, oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. Yes, it would be more fair to test A/B in the same fidelity. Absolutely. And guys, we will have time at the end for Q&A. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're saving questions to the end. And I'll go back to sharing my screen here in present mode. Okay. So Google Trends is awesome for naming. So if you're naming a feature or a site, or you are working on localization terminology, Google Trends is amazing. I'll show you an example of that in a second. Surveys are very powerful when you need large numbers of results. So Google Trends can tell you what is happening in the past. In other words, it will tell you what people have been searching on in the past. Surveys will tell you more about what people might prefer in the future. So you can, obviously have a future scenario and test on it. Okay, let's look at some examples of this one. When I was at Google, we had not launched Google Pay yet. And one of the arguments that I made for the Google Pay team is that we should change the name of the product to Google Pay. And the reason was that people already thought it existed. So this chart was super powerful for making the argument. Google Wallet and Android Pay were both products that actually existed at the time. So those were the product names, and you can see Google Wallet's the blue line, Android Pay is the red line, and Google Pay is this yellow, most frequently used term, or searched, I should say, most frequently searched term. But guess what? That wasn't even, whoops, back we go. That wasn't even a product yet. There was no product called Google Pay at the time. And so what I said was, hey, Google, we should really rename this product to Google Pay because people think that's what it's called anyway. And then that did happen, so that was cool. Okay, so that's how to use Google Trends. Let's look at another quick example. Google's just getting all my examples today. So when I was at Google, there was a very, very high up executive who had this dream and this vision. He wanted to rebrand Google Support as Google Care. And he was very attached to this, and he was going to put this through without doing any testing or checking with anybody. He just thought it was a gorgeous idea, and he just wanted to call all of Google Support Google Care. And so, a lot of people were quietly going, oof, I don't like that. That doesn't sound right. That's not the word people use. And so what we did is we ran a gigantic survey with thousands of users in the US, in Europe, in India, in all the English-speaking countries. And we asked questions like, we couldn't tell anybody that it was for Google. So we had to say, like, if you had trouble with a product and you needed help, or we had to avoid using the term help. So we had to make these questions really clean, and we had to not bias anyone. So we had to say, if you were trying to troubleshoot a product for a large company, which name would you prefer, that kind of thing. And it turns out that help and support are the terms, 1,000 times more common than Google Care. Google Care, we had an open response question. A lot of people said, oh, it sounds like a medical need. So Google Care sounded like, you needed to, I don't know what, get your blood pressure checked or something. So that was a way that we convinced this very high level executive not to change the name of Google Support to Google Care. I don't know if I'm allowed to tell these stories, but too late now. Okay. All right, so we're getting close to the end here. Now let's talk a little bit about how to get people to pay attention to your results. So you do some content testing, you have some findings. Hopefully you're presenting those findings to people who matter. And to do that, I'm going to urge you guys, if you are UX writers, it's critical that you start positioning yourself as a leader. And what do I mean by that? You are helping with product strategy. You are helping with product success. You're contributing hugely to the bottom line of any company with your content. And always have that mindset. This is why testing is a super awesome approach to content and writing, because we can find out what our impact is when we test. Okay, so whenever you're presenting findings, explain the problem, show the pain. When we saw that woman going through the Domino's experience, she was sort of like, what does this even mean? You know, that's not a great sentiment. That's not the way you want people to react to your product. And if we show that little clip, everybody in the room is going to go, oof, that doesn't sound like what we want our users to sound like. They're going to get the problem. Then you're going to propose a solution. And let's be clear about the solution. Don't be wishy-washy. Say, here's my recommendation. Talk like you are the authority, because guess what? You are. And let people know that there's a reason that you have the suggestion that you have. You're open to more feedback. You'll synthesize that feedback, but you have a concrete suggestion for how to fix whatever issue you've just shown to your team. Okay. When you want to demonstrate impact, turn it into money, 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 money. Quantify the impact. Give it a number. Put a number against it. So there's a cost to engagement. Maybe people drop off. What rate do they drop off? If we change it and we improve that drop off, how will that help us? What is the metric for lost sales or wasted time or negative sentiment as a result of some friction in the copy? So those are the things that you want to capture. And then you, whenever possible, want to turn that into a positive. How much money could be saved? How much more revenue could we drive? How much user success could we note? Would our NPS score go up? So these are the metrics that you want to lay out for leadership and for your product team. And let's talk a little bit about an experiment. Okay, so when I was at Google again, because today's stories are all about Google, we ran an experiment in the customer support department, and we got a whole bunch of customer support agents, and we ran an experiment where we had a customer ask a question, and the customer's question could be answered from two different scenarios. In one scenario, the agents were supposed to find the answer in a very long article that had everything. It was like the kitchen sink article about a topic. And the agent had to find the answer in that big, long article. And a lot of the agents really thought they preferred big, long articles. And what we learned is that if you broke up those articles into short, focused topics, they were more easy to search and results would come up more quickly. And we figured out that the time to answer, in other words, the time that it took for the agent to actually get an answer to the customer, was reduced by 2.5 minutes per support contact. So 2.5 minutes, you might look at that and go, okay, yeah, wow, 2.5 minutes, great. Well, so what? That's not much. But then, ta-da, do the mathy math. Okay, and what did we find out? We calculated out this metric. Now, these are completely fictional numbers. Don't quote me on any of this stuff. This is complete fiction. But you can see that in that 2.5 minutes, at 30 cents a minute per agent, we would save 75 cents per contact. So that still doesn't sound like a lot, but a company like Google, I've put 220.8 million support contacts per year. It's probably more like in the billions, but when we calculate this out, that's the savings, $1.6 billion. So make sure that you're doing the math and extrapolating out what the impact is of whatever you've discovered. And this one's got money on it, so that's really powerful. Sometimes it won't be this easy, but this is just an example of how you can quantify the impact of your results. Okay, so do the work, help with the planning, participate in the research, and report out your results. Make specific, concrete recommendations for changes, quantify the impact of those recommendations, and then enjoy being paid more because you're a critical member of the team. Woo! Okay. There is a code here for 20% off our content research and testing course. And if you have questions after that we didn't cover off on, please feel free to email me. I'm going to go out of presentation mode because I can't hear or see you guys, which is tough. Okay. I still can't hear, which is really a bummer. Shoot. Okay, guys, so if you want to ask questions in the chat, it looks like that would be the best way to do it because I can't hear, but I can see the questions. Okay, so if you guys want to shoot me some questions in the chat, that would be awesome. What tool did you use to survey? Oh my gosh. Okay, so one of the problems with working at Google is you can't use any third-party tools. You have to only use Google tools. And one of the great things about Google is obviously they have a lot of proprietary tools, so that's good. So we had a Google survey method that we used that was actually really simple. Not all companies will have it that easy, but remember that you can use, SurveyMonkey to do surveys. You can use anything. Okay, you said you could take a few people's emotional reactions to a word and generalize that to a larger audience. Please explain, as emotions, feelings are not easily measured with small sample sizes. Okay, so that's important. You are right about that. So one of the hardest things about sentiment testing is that you're only testing with a few people, and obviously you're going to have a huge range of results based on people's culture and their context and their environment and their mood that day and whether they ate breakfast. So yeah, when you're doing highlighter testing, like I said, try to get out of your bubble. Try to go test with real people. You can do highlighter testing remotely, so keep that in mind. Let's see, and just try to test with as many people as you can. You might not get like a huge statistically valid sample, but you'll at least get some reflections from people. So for example, humor is super important to test for sentiment. Because humor sometimes lands and sometimes does not. It can really obviously hit people the wrong way. So make sure that your humor is tested. Okay. How do we ensure diversity and being inclusive when we do user testing? Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was talking about. Get out of your bubble. Excuse me. So you do want to test, when we talk about working at Google, Google serves the whole world. So you couldn't just test in Silicon Valley. You have to test in other countries. You have to test people with low-level English skills. You have to test people from very diverse backgrounds. Do the work. Get your butt out there and find those unique people who are your customers who are not sitting next to you in the room. So it just takes work. And when you have a UX research team, those recruiters, those UX research recruiters, if you have them, man, is it a luxury to have those guys. They will help set you up with a diverse set of customers to test with. Okay. Let's see here. What are your yes, a recording will be sent out, so you guys will get a recording. It's harder to find some of those audiences, people with Different kinds of disabilities. Yes, that's true. Do you recommend any web-based tools to evaluate copy prior to talking to users? Yes, I mean, that's what remote user testing is about. So if you build any prototype, you can test that prototype and you can test it with people far away because remote testing is fantastic and fabulous. So when you're doing remote testing, just make sure that you're using a tool that is broad. Let me give an example here. One of the troubles that I had once is, and I'm trying not to name services here, so I apologize. I used a service that paid people to do user testing. Okay, great. Those people who are paid to do user testing are not really very accurate customers for the product that I was trying to find out about. Those testers were just sort of going through the motions. They didn't really care what they were responding to. They weren't invested in the outcome. And so I will caution you, when you're using a service, you do want to make sure that the people you're testing with are part of your core audience. So can't really emphasize that enough. So one of the hardest challenges is getting your hands on customers. And if you guys work in an enterprise company or something that's a big B2B product, one of the toughest things ever is getting your hands on those business customers. A lot of times they're locked up, sales won't let you touch them. So partner when you can with your sales representatives to reach out to those enterprise users. They're harder to get your hands on, but you can do it. Consumer research, of course, is always going to be easier. Okay. How would you test something as specific as the labeling of a user type for the customer? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's say you're trying to test a super specific term. You want people to see themselves in that term. You want people to recognize themselves. You can do a survey. So you can say in your survey, in order to qualify for the survey, you have to meet these criteria. And you would say you have to be, for example, a person who drives a car. And then you can ask questions about drivers and how they see themselves and how they refer to themselves. I'm not sure if that made sense as a question, but make sure that you're pre-qualifying your survey participants so that they're in your target audience. Okay, let's see here. Who do you collaborate with when doing research? Oh, heck yeah. Who do you collaborate with? If you have a researcher, that person is going to be your best friend. I can't even tell you, I've learned absolutely the most in my career from UX researchers. They are the most fantastic people. They're oftentimes not listened to as clearly as they could be. And if you're a researcher, man, just know I love you guys because you are making the product better in a million ways. If your company is not invested in research, get a new job? No. Okay, that's a little too extreme, but make sure that you are doing the research and collaborate with your researchers, collaborate with your product manager, because your product manager is going to have a huge say in the terminology and in the structure of your information. And your product manager can be your ally or, hate to say it, but kind of your enemy. So let's not make enemies of our product managers. Let's make sure we bring them along on our learning journey and really make sure that we are working with them to align on the content, the terms, and the information hierarchy of what we're presenting. Okay. Let's see here. What are your strategies for coding qualitative user responses? Oof. So if you guys, we all know there's two classic types of research. There's hybrid too, but there's qualitative and quantitative. And when you are doing qualitative research, that might be things like your user testing. You've tested with 5 users and one of the metrics you can test is, I gave you a task, were you able to complete it? So if 3 out of 5 users complete a task, that's pretty good, but not great. Ultimately, you want 5 out of 5 users to complete a task. So you're going to test. If 3 users complete the test and others don't, go back, change the copy, change the design, whatever you need to do, test again until you get 5 out of 5. And in that process of test, iterate, you should be able to get to an amazing design. Okay. Let's see. Guys, I apologize if I'm not seeing your question and you feel like it's important. Please retype it because sadly I'm down here. In regard to care versus help, how do you decipher between testers picking basically simply on familiarity rather than understanding the value? One of the things I couldn't share in this quick presentation is that I couldn't share all of the intense work that we did to phrase the questions in a way where we weren't biasing users towards what their affordance was. So everybody hopefully is familiar with the term affordance. And affordance is something a user is used to, they're comfortable with it. And when a user is comfortable with something, why rock the boat? So in some ways, when someone is familiar with a term, that's often a strong argument for keeping that term in place. So could you be discovering something awesome and cool and better? Yes, you could, but don't discount affordance. It's super important for very quick comprehension. Okay. What if you work with a client on their own separate testing team? How can you build bridges to get better access to those active core audience customers? Oh boy, that's a toughie. Yeah. Yeah, there's the hardest thing, like I mentioned, is getting your hands on real customers. And especially if you are a consultant. So COVID has sure changed stuff. It's going to be very much harder to get your hands on real customers when you're a remote consultant. Yeah, but you're going to want to make sure that you do everything you can to connect with customers. And if that means reaching out to customer support or sales, those are the people who are touching customers every day. So build bridges to those people because they're going to be your inroad to talking to real customers. So customer support and sales are going to be the people you're going to want to bridge to when you're looking for content participants. Okay. Any specific tips for testing microcopy like instructional tests, navigational text, button labels, etc.? Yes. So we talked a little bit about there's so many ways to test that stuff. So one of the things that I've even done is done a quick A/B test. In other words, this is a poor example, but let's say you just, let's maybe show this screen. So you can literally show two things side by side and you can ask a question like, which button would you click? And you can just ask users when you ask which button will you click, they are going through their kind of understanding the context of the screen, and then they're literally going to click the button they prefer. So you don't ask which button text do you like better. You ask which action would you take. So you want to make sure that you're always asking about behavior and not so much like somebody's preference, if that makes sense. I hope it does. And that's one way that you can test single bits of text. And in user testing, you're going to mostly want to test that content in context. So during a user test, a usability test, when you see somebody get stuck or hung up, you're going to want to say, what happened there? What are you thinking? I noticed you hesitated there. You know, what was going on? You can also say, if you click this button, what do you think would happen? And that's a good way to understand whether or not your CTA is giving people a good idea of what they're going to see next, because that priming is very important for sending them on the next step. Okay. How to convince, okay, wait, sorry. +1 to Adrian's question regarding working across marketing and content teams. Adrian's question. How do you work and collaborate across marketing and product content teams? I find sometimes the testing methods vary in rigor. Yes, okay. So we all know as UX writers that we need to be super flexible and responsive to people. So we have to be masters at synthesizing feedback of all different types, right? So we already have this chameleon approach. You're going to do the same thing with testing. You're going to be super flexible. When you're testing marketing copy, you'll use methods that are more attuned to marketing situations. So you're going to use the 5-second test, and you're going to do some sentiment testing, and you're going to ask for people's impressions that way. In marketing, you're going to test things like messaging. You might show 2 messages or taglines, and you might say, which one, you know, means more to you? Which one makes you happier? I don't know, something like that. So you can test bits of text. If you are testing a product, A/B testing is super powerful for a web-based application, especially marketing pages. So you can make quick testing changes on a marketing page because it's web-based. If you have a compiled application like an iOS mobile app or something, you can't make those super quick changes. And so you have to test with prototyping. And it's going to be a little bit harder because when you're prototyping, you're testing with presumed customers. When you're testing on a marketing page that's live in public, then you're testing with real customers. So A/B testing is something that's very hard to do if you have a compiled application, like a mobile app. A/B testing is something that you sort of have to do outside of the product. You can still do it. It's very powerful. When you say A/B testing, it's really just this or that. And multivariate testing, this, that, or 3 other things. Okay. Could you elaborate on the rationale behind not emphasizing or phrasing it as a choice preference? Oh, okay. So let's talk about that a little bit. One point I want to make really quickly, Intuit used to have this phrase. Intuit is a super UX forward company. They're very into design thinking. They're fantastic that way. One of the mottos that they had was no surveys. And the reason they said no surveys is if you ask someone, which do you like better, this or that, they're going to tell you which they like better, but that doesn't necessarily reflect their behavior. So there's this, in design thinking, there's say versus do. It's an expression, say versus do. And it means users might say they'll do one thing, or they might think they'll do something, but when it comes to contextually measuring their behavior, it is often different than what they say they will do. And so that's what I mean by not asking super simple questions like, what do you like better, this or that? It's more like, where would you click, or what action would you take? And that is going to be more revealing of a customer's intention. Okay. Any tips on the Microsoft product reaction cards? Oof. I don't know what that is, so I'll not answer it. Okay. So guys, we're pretty close to time here. If anyone has any last urgent questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat. I think Carm was going to come back, but I don't know if she'll make it. If she doesn't, I would like to thank you guys so much for coming today. This was so fun. I absolutely. There it's Carm.
Yep, I made it back, Bobby.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. And guys, write down that code and take our content testing course. I will see you there if you take the course. Hopefully you will. And thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it.
Yes, so thank you, Bobby. We are very excited to have you here. It sounds like I was able to come in for the last 15 minutes or so, and it sounds like there were some really good questions. There was some really good feedback. I know myself, I want to take a few of these tips and tricks back to my organization as well. So I'll be sure to check out the video. And guys, the video for this recording will be made available within the next 72 hours. So definitely be sure to look out for that. But I would like to thank you, Bobby, for coming. I hope to have you back again. And yeah, and thank all our members for attending. And please visit our UXPA education tab for all of our upcoming webinars and short courses. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.